Hi everyone! In this video we are going to do some styrofoam printmaking, which is basically where you make a stamp from styrofoam. I'm going to show you a basic way like this where you draw a picture on your styrofoam, and a more complicated one where you use your styrofoam multiple times to make a radial design. Alright, let's get started. You're going to need to gather your materials, so a piece of styrofoam is needed. I had this styrofoam plate. I had saved these meat trays from the grocery store. You might find styrofoam in a to-go container if you've ordered food, or sometimes egg cartons are styrofoam, so you could cut a piece off of that with permission. You will also need either like a washcloth or a rag or a sponge, something that you can get your paper wet with. You will need a clean piece of paper and also a dull pencil. Okay, something too sharp won't quite work for this, so you're going to want a dull pencil, and I'll show you how to dull that later. You'll also need some markers, any kind of washable markers like these. Permanent markers will not work for this. Now, when we do this project at school, we would probably use this tool here, which is called a brayer, which most of you probably do not have at home. So an alternative, if you have one, would be a rolling pin. Now, if you can't find a rolling pin, or your parents say no, which is fine, you don't absolutely have to have one, but they are kind of helpful when you're doing your stamp. So, we are going to start by taking our piece of styrofoam, and we're going to cut off the edge so that it is a flat piece of styrofoam. So whatever kind of container you're working with, you're going to want to cut off any part that doesn't lay flat, because when you're stamping, you're going to want it to be a flat piece. So I'm just cutting the edge off of this. And then you could leave it a circle like this, and you could have a circle stamp. Or I wanted a rectangle, so I am going to cut the edges off to make a rectangle. So before you start drawing on your styrofoam to make your stamp, I recommend sketching first. So you can come up with any idea that you want for your stamp. It could be a fish or a bird, anything you'd like to do. I chose to do these flowers here, and I'm just kind of sketching an idea out so that when I get to my styrofoam, I know what it's going to look like, because once you draw on that styrofoam, you can't erase it. So I really recommend sketching your idea first before you start drawing on your actual stamp. So I have my sketch and my styrofoam all ready. You're going to now need a dull pencil to draw your idea on your styrofoam. If you need to dull it so there's not a sharp point, you can just draw a little bit on a piece of paper. If your pencil is too sharp, it might go through. So I am going to start drawing my flowers, and I'm starting slow, and I'm trying to kind of match my sketch the best I can. And you don't want to press all the way down the first time. You're kind of just pressing a little bit into the styrofoam, and then you're going to go on top of all of that again and really press it down so that you really feel each line. So here I have finished drawing my flowers the first time, and I can tell that there's some areas that need to be pressed down a little bit more. You really want to feel those lines. They need to be pressed in there really well. So I'm going to go over all of my lines, and you should be able to see and feel the difference between the first time you draw it and then when you go over it a couple more times. So I have all my lines pressed in really well, and you can see them and feel them. and you're ready to start coloring your stamp. So I am using some regular Crayola markers, and I'm going to color in every area of the whole stamp, even the background. You can kind of mix some colors, so I'm using this light green, and I will put some dark green kind of next to it. And while you're coloring, you're going to want to keep in mind your background. Every part of your stamp, even the background, will be colored with marker. So if you're making like a fish and you want it to be in a blue water background, you might want to think about using a different color for your fish so that it doesn't blend in with the background. So I am all done coloring my flowers, and I'm ready to start my background. So I'm going to choose red because I haven't used red yet. And you could color it all one color, or you could try something a little bit more difficult, which would be kind of like blending two colors and kind of making an ombre. So I'm going to use orange and red, and I'm going to blend them together to make kind of like a sunset sky. So I'm starting with orange because it's the lighter of the two colors, and I'm just going to fill in all of the space down at the bottom. So now I have the bottom filled in pretty well. I am going to go ahead and get my red marker, and I'm going to color in the rest with red, and I'm just going to kind of blend them together right here. So I'm going on top of the orange just a little bit and blending them together and then filling in the rest. So when you are finished coloring, you are going to be ready to stamp it on a piece of paper. So you're going to need a damp, either rag or a sponge, not too wet. You don't want it to be dripping, but you do want it wet enough to get your paper just slightly wet. You do want to see the shine of the water, like right here. You can see it's kind of shiny. That's about how much water you want to be on your paper. So I'm gently petting my paper, going in one direction with the sponge. And I'm going to take my stamp and I'm going to gently and carefully put it on that wet area. And you don't want your stamp to move. So I'm kind of being very careful to make sure it stays still. And if you have a brayer or rolling pin that you want to use, this would be the time to kind of just flatten that stamp on your paper. If you don't have a rolling pin, you can just use your hand and just kind of gently rub the whole piece of paper onto the styrofoam. And then once it's pressed down, you can take it off, and voila! You have made a styrofoam print. Now, this is a pretty tricky technique to do. So if your first print doesn't come out the way you want it to, the really awesome thing about styrofoam is you can wash it off and you can color on it again and stamp it multiple times. So if the first one doesn't work, you can try again until you get the print that you are happy with. Right, if you want to try something a little more challenging, the next part of this video, I'm going to show you how to make this radial design using the styrofoam. So I'm going to start with a sketch, and I took one corner here and I'm going to make that what's going to be the center of the design. So this small square is going to be repeated 4 times, and then that point is going to be the center each time I stamp it. So this is a little tricky to understand, and you'll kind of figure it out once we get started. So for this one, you're going to need a small square to make your stamp. So the first part of making this radial design is the same as the last one. You're going to use a dull pencil to press your lines to make your stamp, and press them in really well so you can feel them and see them. And then when you have all of your lines pressed in, you are ready to add color. Using your markers, you're going to color in your whole design, just like we did for the last one. And once you have it all colored in, you are ready to stamp. And that's what's going to be the different part in this design. So I have my stamp. It's ready for the first stamp. And this is going to be stamped 4 times. And you're going to rotate it just like this each time you stamp it, and that's going to give you your radial design. So I have my center, that half circle. I'm going to wet my paper very carefully. Take it, make sure that center part, look, I'm being very careful to turn it so that center part is going towards the center of my design. Once my paper is wet and I've got my center, I'm going to very carefully press it in, making sure that the stamp doesn't move. And you can use your brayer or rolling pin. I am just going to use my hands because this is a smaller stamp. And then there is my first one. And you're going to do that 4 times. And it has to rotate each time to get that design. So I have my second one ready to print. I'm figuring out where is the center going to be, and I have to rotate it. So I figured it out. I'm going to very carefully wet my paper in that area where that stamp is going to go. And just like before, I am going to line up my stamp so it kind of is on that edge, and I'm going to press it down really well. I am ready to stamp my third one. It's all colored the same way. I'm going to very carefully wet my paper and press it down really well, just like before. Figuring out where the center is, make sure I get that point pointing to the center, line up the edge, and press down. So I'm almost done coloring my last piece, and by now you all should be an expert on how to print this. I'm going to make sure the center is lined up. I'm going to get my sponge and wet my paper very carefully, not to smear any of the other parts. Line it up really carefully and press down really well. And that will be the last print for your radial design. So when you pull it up, there is your beautiful radial design. All right, I hope you enjoyed learning how to make some styrofoam stamps. And remember, those stamps are reusable, so you can color them and print them as many times as you'd like. And if you want to share anything with me, you can do that in Artsonia. You can send me an email, or you can upload a picture at the Trailwood at Home Specials Facebook page. Thanks for watching.